Hello, everybody. This is Dan Libenson, and I am here with Denise Handlarski, and she is going to pop on in just a moment for the next episode of the show that we call Daring Judaism. Denise's picture has not yet arrived. Oh, there it is. So, hey, Denise, we are.
Hey,
Hey, great to see you.
yes, good to see
So.
you too.
I think we have a little bit of a lag today, so we'll have to pause, I guess, before when we finish a sentence, if the other person is going to come in. Sorry to anybody out there listening if you hear us talking over each other. We're not doing it intentionally. Um, so Denise, there's a lot to talk about today that as I guess I'll just mention that for those who may be new to this show, it's called Daring Judaism, which at least has a double meaning. I think at some point maybe we'll find many, many more levels of meaning, but it's both the search for a more daring kind of Judaism, a more bold Judaism, and also a little bit of an I dare you Judaism to take a little bit more risk. It's maybe it's a similar concept, but that's what we're after here. Can we really imagine a Judaism that in some ways looks profoundly different from the Judaism that we know and love or don't love? And so today, and typical every week we have conversations about various elements of this. I should say that Denise, you're the rabbi of a secular humanistic Judaism movement congregation called Orenu in Toronto, and also the founder and rabbi of an online secularsynagogue.com. We've been searching for the motto. Is a congregation? Yes, no. Is there all kinds of things? What is a synagogue? That's exactly what the thing is all about. And I'm the proprietor or one of the proprietors of this thing here, Jewish Life. We're also trying to figure out what it's all about. That might be something to talk about. And on this show, we, among other things, we always talk about the weekly Torah portion a little bit from a secular perspective, which is a really fun thing to do. I would say a secular, and not that these things are in any conflict, but sometimes people think they are, a secular and serious perspective, that we take it seriously as an important text and nevertheless come at it from a secular perspective. So Denise, I'll turn it over to you to help orient us for some of what we want to start with.
Okay, that sounds good. I hope I'm coming through clearly. I know I'll just share that I'm experimenting with a new Ethernet cable, and it's because our Wi-Fi has been really choppy, and we were trying to figure out why, and I think it's just the overloading. We live in a very densely populated part of Toronto, and there's just all these people on Wi-Fi all the time, and so we have as much Wi-Fi as one can pay for, and they say it's just a little bit slow. So these are the joys and challenges of tech, which a lot of people have been finding out as they connect to all kinds of things online.
And
So
I'll
we're
just tell you
working.
that for whatever reason, your video sort of comes in and out, and for folks, sometimes you'll just be a disembodied voice over either a
Oh
black
God.
screen or
Okay,
over
you know
my
what?
face, but it's fine.
I'm going to talk for 2 minutes about something, and then I'm going to ask you to talk, and I'm going to switch back to Wi-Fi. So that stops happening. So, but my possibly disembodied talking will be about May Day. A happy May Day, everybody. It's the 1st of May, which is traditionally a labor holiday. I know in North America in the fall we have Labor Day, but May Day is the workers' day. And it wasn't until I traveled internationally that I realized that May Day is a big deal in lots of places. So once I was in Santiago, Chile, and it was May Day, and the workers filled the streets, tens of thousands of people. And it was really inspiring to see. And we don't have that kind of active labor movement. We have lots of labor movement, but it's not the kind of thing where people, riot in the streets in the same way. And this year is an interesting May Day because there are a lot of workers who are protesting their current working conditions, lack of access to personal protective equipment, lack of danger pay. And so that's what I wanted to start off talking about. So Dan, give us your thoughts while I switch over, and hopefully you won't lose me entirely. I'll be back in a sec.
Right. And I'll say to our listeners who are interested in how the sausage is made that one of the dirty little secrets of our show is that while Denise is giving the initial framing, I'm quickly updating the Facebook post so that it has the description of the show on it. So it's all kinds of interesting things going on here. This is the world of low tech but high quality content, Jewish digital world. So yeah, May Day, I think it's really interesting, the question of May Day. And I mean, it's interesting to me on a few levels, in the sense that, like, for example, actually, today's Torah portion, I mean, we didn't mean to get into it yet, but today's Torah portion includes, for example, the law that you should not reap your fields to completion, and that you should leave a corner of your field for the poor. And what strikes me always as annoying is when something like May Day is presented among the Jewish community as some kind of newfangled liberal thing that, maybe a lot of Jews are liberal, so, of course they like that, but not that it's a Jewish thing. And it feels to me like I don't know how to handle that confusion, and I don't know how to talk about it. Like, do we need to, is the only way to get Jews to accept that something is Jewish to make it explicitly Jewish, meaning that we should institute a new Jewish holiday called, like, Yom Ha,
Yom
yeah,
HaLabor.
yeah, Yom HaAvodah or something like that.
Yeah,
Like, which in Hebrew is the day of the workers. The day of work.
right.
And we would say that, and it happens to. It's not always on the 15th of ER. Sometimes it's on the 12th, and we come up with some, like, leaner reason why it might switch around. But the answer is really it always ends up on the 1st of May. Or whatever. And that would be the only way that it would be accepted by the Jews as a Jewish holiday. But it feels to me like uh, it's a really important Jewish holiday. And
Mhm.
and I guess we could explore the question of what would it look like to be, uh, what would it look like if it was a Jewish holiday? What would the
Mm,
would it be different, or would it be? I mean, there are ways that, right, May Day actually comes out of the workers. I think, I mean, I don't know exactly, but the workers in Europe, that somehow May Day was the day where they um, protested or organized it. And it sort of comes out of that. So doesn't come out of a Jewish origin, but nor does any of Judaism. So
mm.
so what would we make of it? I don't know. That's kind of my initial thought of it, because it just seems like, I mean, and I would go to what you said about this time, right? I mean, that we tend to think about organizing and unions as about pay, and I think pay is important, and it seems like that people should have a living wage is important. But in a time like this, we're really talking about that workers are dying because of the inequities in our society, in the sense that, and whether it's that certain people have to work, right? Like those of us who are blessed for one reason or another to be able to work at home, and, you know, and especially those of us who can work at home and still more or less do the jobs that we had before, that's an incredible blessing. But a lot of
Right.
workers and a lot of employers, that can, are saying, hey, you can work from home even if you weren't before. But there's certain kind of jobs that really can't be done from home. I mean, you can't uh, stock the grocery store from home. And so, and who has those jobs? Typically people who have less resources, and they're being forced to go to work or lose their job. And that might be appropriate in the sense that it is an essential job and we need someone to be stocking the groceries. And at the same time, we have this shortage of protective equipment, and are we really making
Yeah.
sure that that's going to who needs it?
Yeah, I think you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, you have to go to work, you're essential, and then say, well, but you're not so essential that we want to pay you properly and provide, important safety equipment. So
Right.
there's no question people are being treated as though they're expendable. And it's, I think there have been certainly it's true in Canada, and I believe it's true in lots of places in the US, that there are all kinds of government packages for people who are out of work as a result of COVID-19. But they specified that if you quit your job you're not eligible, because what they were worried about is people quitting grocery store and factory and,
Mm,
bus driving and all those kinds of jobs, because they're actually making more money from the government benefit than they are going to work every day.
mhm,
And so the argument is, well, then why are people who are going to work every day making less money than the people who are at home? It really doesn't make sense. And so I think this is a particular May Day where there's mass job actions from workers at Amazon, Instacart, Whole Foods, that whole subsection. And I believe some other very large companies as well, where the workers are saying, you can't you can't treat us this way. If we're essential, then we deserve danger pay, and certainly the very maximum safety, whatever is possible in terms of keeping workers safe should be in place right now. And we have companies like Amazon. So I'll just tell the people, Dan and I were sort of joking, this Ethernet cable that isn't working for me. I said it took a really long time for it to arrive, and I did order from Amazon, I'll admit. And Amazon's making record profits and still unwilling to put more money into their workers. So I do
right.
think it's an important conversation for us to have. And it is a Jewish conversation for us to have, even if this is not, a Jewish holiday the way we think of other Jewish holidays. There are lots of things, including in this Torah portion, as you said, about the importance of treating workers fairly. And there's all kinds of Jewish teachings about it. I'm reminded of two quick stories, if you don't mind, Dan.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice because it'll be critical of Jews both on the right and the left of the political spectrum. So once, when I was a teen, I attended something that was supposed to be about it was sort of like what we're talking about, Jewish understandings of work and tzedakah, or charity and justice. And it ended up being filled with these people who were fairly right of center, and they were trying to find like Jewish loopholes. Like, okay, so I'm supposed to give 10% of my earnings to charity, but what counts? Is it 10% of like net or gross? Like, how do I get away with something here?
Right.
Can the charity be connected to the company I run, and we filter it back through? Like, all kinds. I was like horrified. And then I was also, I mean, where I'm more likely to be found is hanging out with people on the left. And I was with a bunch of sort of, Jewish labor, like descended from the Bund kind of types. And we had just come out of a session talking about, the worker and, the worker's place in society. And then we went for lunch in the cafeteria. And I saw the way these people were treating the cafeteria staff. So disrespectfully. And I was like, there's often this real
Mhm,
disconnect between
mhm,
the good conversations we're having in Jewish spaces and then the way we actually act in the world.
mhm. Well, and that actually brings me to a question that I think is a really, it's like a valuable secular question to have, which is, what is the point of holidays? And what is the point of rituals? I'm thinking about the book, I think we might have even discussed it briefly a few times ago, Alain de Botton's book called uh,
Yes.
Religion for Atheists. And he in this book, he's a philosopher, kind of a really interesting guy. Like, he's this British philosopher that kind of like just takes on a new area of interest, and he must have some kind of like self-funding because he has no, he's not necessarily qualified on any of these topics, except that he's a smart guy, and he does a lot of research, and he writes on the subject, and then he kind of moves on to the next subject, and for a while he was really interested in this idea, and he kind of wrote this book about how secular society could learn from religion and say, well, religion actually works in certain ways, and we can translate that to secular uh, secular contexts, and he talks about things like maybe we could redesign museums to be more like a cathedral, and somehow to actually have something more, let's call it spiritual, going on there, even though it's from a secular standpoint. So I think it's interesting to think about holidays in that regard, because I don't know, like I'm just thinking about this particular situation with May Day, and certainly I'm engaging in some degree of retail therapy during this period. Some of it is because I'm doing this new job, and I need new equipment to be able to do it well. So that's sort of legitimate. And then there's the piece where like I'm just trying to get like a new coffee maker so that I can experiment with different methodologies of coffee making. But that's kind of keeping me sane, maybe an overstatement, but that's keeping me interested. It's keeping me, and yet, but that's different from ordering, rice and eggs, things that are really kind of essential to just, human life. And you could argue you could argue that Amazon shouldn't be allowed to be selling me a coffee maker during this period, because it's actually putting a person's life in danger. And you could also argue that I shouldn't be allowed to buy it. And maybe that's a more powerful rate, meaning that maybe my religion, such as it is, should tell me not to buy those things in a time when the buying of it puts someone in danger. Now, the problem is that there's all kinds of ways in which that it's not a simple point, because it's also giving somebody a job, and maybe they would want a job. My kids actually have been telling us that we should use Instacart because they're and we say, but we don't want to put the Instacart shopper in danger. And they're like, but the Instacart shopper wants to have a job, and I think it's a really important point that they're making. And I think they're also hoping that we would have a wider variety of food in the house. But they're trying to make an argument.
The Instacart shopper will add cookies.
The Instacart shopper will bring chips, yeah. And so whereas the mom is mostly getting fruit, but the but I think it's a really interesting point, of course, philosophically. But let's say that we had some kind of conclusion about it, and we said, look, yes, we should use Instacart for groceries, but we shouldn't use Amazon for coffee makers. How would we then operationalize that? And I feel like that's where holidays and rituals come in. And May Day, and actually we've talked about this, I've been talking about it with different people in different ways, primarily with B'nai Lappi, and we were talking about like that there are these kind of traditions. I think it's Greenberg writes about this, that there, or someone else that she mentioned, that this idea that there are certain kinds of things that we want to remember to do, to be, that we forget at different levels of rapidity. So for example, we forget to rest all the time. So it's important to have a weekly Shabbat to remind us to rest, to get us in the habit of resting, to give us a sense of what our life would be like if we turned it down a little. And then hopefully, if we only had Shabbat once a year, we would go crazy by 6 months into the year because we wouldn't be resting enough. Whereas there are other principles, maybe like remembering or atoning for our sins, and that's related to today, where it's like it's enough once a year to do that, and maybe somehow that works. And maybe the truth is that the Jewish calendar is wrong, and maybe we should be atoning quarterly or something. But in principle, you could see the holiday cycle as trying to achieve something like that. And what's interesting is that we don't really have a holiday basis, I don't think, for like treating workers well, or that sort of thing. And you could say, well, maybe we're missing a holiday on the Jewish calendar. So it's not only that Jews only observe things like May Day if they think it's a Jewish, but maybe actually we really need that in Judaism. But maybe, once a day once a year isn't even enough, and particularly in a time of like this. And I don't know, like maybe the holidays and other technologies. I mean, I go back to Alan de Botton's idea of religion for atheists, that in the stepping away from some of the philosophical underpinnings of religion, we may want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and in fact double down on the baby, and have twice as many holidays, but all of them, from a secular perspective. But we think that holidays achieve something if they're well designed.
Yeah, I'm torn. I like the idea of holidays serving a sort of function and a reminder to do things that we maybe always want to do, but we don't create space or time for. I also think that there is merit in saying there isn't a special day for this, because this is something we're supposed to do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the idea of Shabbat, for example, with Tiffany Shlain and others talking about doing tech Shabbats or digital Shabbats where you're device free, even if you're not doing it because you're Orthodox or because you follow all of the commandments of Shabbat, but you make a conscious decision to, to just unplug for 24 hours, drawing on the lessons of Shabbat, but for our kind of contemporary moment. So a lot of people have been experimenting with that. And then in secular synagogue, we had a really interesting talk about it where we said there's also merit in not saving it all for one day, but rather putting rules in place for yourself every day. So for
Right.
me, it's no screens the first or last 30 minutes of the day, never when I'm with my kids, never when I'm at a meal, and creating a structure where it's not a full Shabbat, but you're reminding yourself every day. And worker stuff, I think, is connected to that. I think the Jewish side of me wants to shop as ethically as possible. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I do make an effort, especially now, to support local businesses, to buy things that are made by union labor or, places, entrepreneurs who are doing it themselves. And I do think that that's a really powerful thing to do every day. I wouldn't want it to be saved up for, once a year or once a quarter.
Yeah, by the way, I guess we should mention at this point that this, even though we tend to cover it later in the show, but this week's Torah portion is called Acharei Mot Kedoshim. It's a double portion, and it's there's a lot to talk about, so we'll talk about a lot. But I just want to mention that it's a lot of rules, and it's a lot of and some of them are good, some of them seem not so good, and but a lot of them are these daily kind of rules that you're talking about. So it's like
Right.
you should not sleep with your sister any day, but what's also interesting in the parsha is that it happens to be the one that mentions that there should be a thing called Yom Kippur. It doesn't actually call it Yom Kippur, but it describes
No,
the date of Yom
a
Kippur
day
as,
of atoning.
a day of atoning, but it's well, that is, but it says that it's on the 10th of the month, the 7th month, which is the day of Yom Kippur, and it describes elements of it, and the point is that it's interesting that in this whole kind of part of Leviticus, which is like describing all the sins that you could possibly do, or all of the good things that you might not do, that it also happens to mention this one day a year of the Day of Atonement. So in principle, it's a little of both. It's saying, yeah, we do have these things that we should be doing every day, and we have this once a year chance to kind of think about how we did and right the whole ship, and so it's interesting how, to me, like how that might work with other types of values that we might say are missing from biblical or even rabbinic Judaism, and or that maybe are there, like in rabbinic Judaism, I think also in the Torah, but they're very there's some very significant ideas, like treating workers properly is one that's significant. There was actually something, it just so happened, I forget if I've mentioned to you or mentioned on the show, that my wife and I have been doing the daily Talmud page. We did talk about this, and
Hmm.
it just
We
happens to
did.
be that last night's page was talking about the sort of guilt that you bear if you are in a position to protest somebody else doing something wrong, and you fail to protest, that even if your protest would have been futile, that you bear the guilt of the bad thing that the person did. And if you're in a position of leadership and power and you don't protest, you bear it even more heavily. And so it basically says that the
Hmm.
exilarch, who was the head Jew of the Talmudic period, that he bears basically all the guilt of the community if he doesn't sort of protest the bad things that he sees. And anyway, so but the connection here, I think, is that, like, okay, so but how do we, so those are things like in the category that you were talking about of things that we should do every day. We should protest bad things every day. We should treat the workers well every day. And yet we know that people are fallible, people are lazy, people are people have competing drives, and they do bad things. And so is there some way, and maybe the genius, I guess I'm suggesting that the genius of, not necessarily the genius of Judaism, but the genius of certain ancient systems tends to be that they have a set of values and rules that they say that you should do, and they also have some kind of cycles of the year, of the week, of the month, where hopefully you can kind of recharge something. And I
Hmm.
wonder, I wonder what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean we're in a bit of a period of recharge in some ways now.
Mm,
A lot of people have likened this time to Shabbat, but when you were speaking, it was reminding me we don't have a day or a holiday that comes weekly or monthly or annually for workers, but we do have the Shemitah, the sabbatical year,
mm,
which is a lot about the land, but is also about work and contracts. So there is something in time, Jewishly, where we are reminded to rest, to take a break, to treat each other fairly. It's in there. In this week's Torah portion, it also mentions you talked about the gleaning, that you're supposed to leave part of your field for those who need it, which might be not so much about workers and about people who aren't working, but it also, especially now that there is a lot of hunger, um, is a reminder that we do have things in Judaism, in Jewish time, in the calendar, and also in text that is talking about how we act in these ways. And especially now, I think it's an important thing to pay attention to, because for those of us who are lucky enough to be able to have a bit of rest at this time, who aren't, sick or frontline healthcare workers working around the clock, or those essential workers with difficult and sometimes dangerous jobs, if you do have time to be at home more, I think there's some boredom and some craving for meaning. So this is an excellent time to be thinking about what are the lessons around how I act now
yeah,
and who I want to be. My blog post this week was on, who do I want to be during this time? And I think it's a question a lot of people are asking.
yeah. It's funny, like I've been talking a lot about this time as mapping onto the mythic Ur story of